Well, Butch, you are from the Miami area, correct? Butch, you are from the Miami area originally. Is that correct?
I was born and raised in Miami, Florida. That's correct.
How did you wind up deciding to go Winston Cup racing?
Oh, that's a long story. So when I was 12 and 13 years old, my neighbor that lived across the street from me owned a gas station. And after school, we used to go down there, pump gas, the days when you checked oil and wiped windshields. And I was all about cars when I was young. I always have been. No stick and ball, but all about cars. And the mechanic at the gas station where we used to go raced at Hialeah Speedway, had a sportsman car. And we used to go out there on Saturday nights and help him and hang out. And through that whole process, I met Bob. Turned into me racing Hialeah Speedway, and won a few races down there. Met Bob. He built motors for
Bob Rahilly.
Bob Rahilly built motors for the late model cars down there, and was very successful at it. And you know, he really wanted to go NASCAR racing. Is what his whole life ambition was to do that. And it really wasn't mine. I had no aspirations of doing that. I didn't know much about NASCAR racing. You know, I did the little local thing, but he had a higher standard and a goal that he wanted to achieve. And if you remember back, Randy Tissett, I don't know if you remember that name, but he had actually built the motors for Randy's car before Bob and I ever started NASCAR racing. And I met Bob, and he's like, well, let's go NASCAR racing. It's like, you know, how are we going to get the money to do that? And you know, how do you do that? It was a whole nother level of things to do. And when I was 17, I started a little welding automotive shop at 17. And Bob had started a little machine shop, and we had a bright idea to go NASCAR racing. He says, well, sell your little business, and he had a little bit of money, and I sold my business for $10,000. And
At 17?
Yeah. I had started wow. Right out of high school, I had started a little automotive and welding shop and accumulated some stuff and had a little bit of customer base. I actually sold that business to a Miami police officer who bought it. He wanted to be a mechanic. So he wanted to buy my little business, and we pooled our money. Went to Hutcherson-Pagan and bought a car that Ron had won the ARCA race with, minus the drivetrain. And we bought that car and brought it back to Miami, Florida, and Bob built the motor, and I worked in the car, and we decided we were going to go NASCAR racing. So that's how it started. So that's the quick version.
Now, what was the plan when it came to you driving? Were you going to try to make a go of it yourself, or were you just simply filling the seat until you and Bob could find somebody with a little more experience?
We didn't really have a game plan. I mean, we're in our early 20s, you know, and I had been racing down there, but I never had a burning desire to be a driver. You know, I loved all aspects of the racing. I liked racing on the cars, and did my share of wrecking and that sort of thing. So, you know, the natural progression, I think, when we bought that car was Bob said, well, you drive it, and I'll build the motors for it, and we'll go NASCAR racing, which is what we did. And it was short-lived. You know, I was fortunate enough to be able to run in Daytona and Charlotte and Atlanta, but you know, there was really not much success there. I crashed at Daytona, not really my fault, but crashed, and we were out of money, didn't have any money. But we started in a time when you could build the cars, build the motors, and kind of do everything yourself. Yeah. And which is what we did, and you know, didn't last very long, but it whet our appetite enough to know that that's what we wanted to do. And we started accumulating a little bit of equipment, and one thing led to another. We were renting cars or trying to get somebody in the seat, or you know, we had some local guys down there that were renting seats, and Gary Ballou came along, and Gary was trying to do some things, and that's kind of how it started. And then one thing led to another, and that's how we started our NASCAR career.
Now, you actually ran out of Miami those first few years. How difficult was that to manage?
Well, it was really difficult. And when we really decided that we wanted to do that, make a go of racing, you know, we had to move to Charlotte. I mean, you just had to. And I came up here in 1982. I came to Charlotte from Miami. Didn't know one single person. Rented a building over next to Tom Pistone's. It used to be a junkyard. Cleaned it out, cleaned it up. Had the cars up here, and our engine shop was in Florida. And Bob had a revenue source down there with the engines, and that was really our source of income there for a while. He was building motors down there, so he was still down there. So it really got to be a challenge when the cars were up here every week. we would meet. I would drive halfway to Miami, and he'd bring up to
Good
bring the engine
night.
for the next week. So we did that for a little while before he even moved up here.
As difficult as that must have been, I mean, forget about racing, physically, burning the candle at both ends, what kept you going in racing?
Oh, the desire to want to race.
Okay.
There's no, I mean, we were just racers. You know what I mean? And to this day, I mean, you know, you never get rid of that. I mean, if you once racing gets in your blood, it never leaves. You know, it just, opportunities change and life changes, but that never goes away. But when you want to do something so bad, you know, you do anything you do to do it. And it was just a different day and time. You know, we built our own cars, built our own engines, and something we wanted to do. And, you know, the thrill of doing it is just, it's what you want to do. You know, and it didn't matter what it took to do it. You know, you had 24 hours a day. It's like, we got to get there. We got to get to that race. We got to do this. We got to do that. So, but you just made it work.
Now, you mentioned this a minute ago, but in those first few years, everybody except Bill France Jr. drove your cars.
Yeah, they did. So.
Was that a rent-a-ride situation, or were you just trying to make it race to race financially?
We were trying to make it race to race. It clearly wasn't a plan.
Yeah.
But our cars, we put a lot of effort into. Our cars had some speed, you know, and so you attracted, you know, people had interest in the stuff. You know, we had Joe Milliken came along. We had a little bit of sponsorship there with Joe, and you put him in the seat till that runs out. You know, the money runs out. And then I guess the biggest sponsorship break we had was Ned Jarrett. When I had that pet dairy deal in 1982, after I moved up here, Ned kind of took us under his wing. And that pet dairy deal came through Ned Jarrett. Ned knew the president and CEO of Pet at the time. And it wasn't a lot of money, but I'm trying to, maybe $150,000 or something to run 10 or 18 races. And Ruttman had just left Stacy.
Uh-huh.
And we put a deal together to run, I think, 18 races with Joe Ruttman through Ned Jarrett. All because we had these one-off deals earlier.
Yeah.
But it was enough to whet the appetite of us to want to keep doing it in whatever it took to get to the racetrack. But there was other people paying attention too, watching. You know, here's two young guys, and their stuff seems to run pretty good. They do their own stuff, build their own engines, and, you know, do their own cars. And, you know, Joe wanted to drive for us after he left Stacy's, and we were fast with Joe, but through that led to the Hodgdon Neil Bonnett situation. So it just kind of progressed. But yeah, it was a lot of work, a lot of effort, and a lot of desire.
So Ned was selling milk and beer. He had all his bases covered.
Back then. So, yeah, he was. We had a lot of good friends in this business. You know, a lot of people saw the work that we were trying to do and the effort we were trying to make. And Bobby Allison, he was there again. They were from South Florida. Bobby and Donnie and Banjo Matthews, they all came out of Highway Speedway. And Bobby Allison is probably my all-time hero. I just think the world of Bobby Allison. He to me epitomizes a sport. You know, he's done everything in it: build cars, motors, drive, championships. But he was real influential in getting a lot of things happening for us in the beginning. When the Neil Bonnett thing came along with Warner, Bobby had a lot to do with that. You know, we didn't know Neil. Neil was from Hueytown, Alabama, and, you know, Bobby and Donnie had moved up there. But when Warner came along, was with the Wood Brothers, and we had that deal with Junior to run the two-car thing, they had a one-year gap. And we were running decent with Ruttman in the pet dairy car, and Bobby tells Neil, so why don't you go over there with Butch and Bob? And you had a one-year gap where you needed to fill in. The Wood Brothers didn't want to run all the races. They hadn't been running all the races, and we were committed to do that if we had the revenue and the driver. So Bobby and Warner and we all got together, and 1983 was a banner year for us. I mean, it really, really was a big difference. And it caught us off guard, and I think Neil was like, oh, my, you know, we had a lot of success together in that one-year gap. But it all started on the one-offs. You had asked me about the one-offs, you know, but it's kind of, you tried to do the one-offs you had, you tried to do the best you could with it. They weren't a lot of money. They were one-off deals, you know, but it was enough to move us along to where Ned's looking and bringing us Pet and Ruttman and Neil, and, you know, that's kind of how our team started. So we definitely didn't buy our way in. You know, it was a lot of work, but it paid off. It worked.
Now, you mentioned one of those one-off deals before we started recording. According to what you said, the first car that Kyle Petty ever drove in Winston Cup competition, once he actually qualified for a race, was one of your cars.
That's right. It was.
How did that work out?
It was at Dover. Ralph Salvino, same thing, would all become friends with Ralph, at STP. And Kyle had, I think, run some ARCA races at the time. And we put this deal together. We were doing one-offs, and Ralph said, well, let's put Kyle in the car at Dover. And so they put STP on the side of a yellow car, put Kyle Petty in it at Dover, Delaware. And it was a highlight. I mean, Richard ran some practice in that car at Dover. And if you can imagine two young guys just starting out in NASCAR racing and have the king sit in your car and strap in was something I'll never forget. That he strapped in that car and ran some practice for us at Dover, and Kyle raced it. And I think he wound up parking it because it handled so bad. We didn't do anything with it, but it was kind of a neat trivia thing. And I had recently seen Kyle up at the North Carolina Hall of Fame. I went up there and showed him a picture of that, and he goes, oh, my goodness.
Yeah.
So he autographed it for me, and Richard saw it. So they remember. Just probably not a lot of fans remember that story.
It looked like you were gaining a little bit of traction with Gary Blue in 1981, 1982. Didn't you win a late model sportsman race?
We did. We
at
won Charlotte.
Okay.
Yeah. It was an awesome race. Jody Ridley and him were rubbing fenders, and I think Dale Earnhardt and him had a little scuffle in that race. And, yeah, Gary won that sportsman race.
You were gaining a little bit of traction, but then he got into all his trouble and everything, and that's that. What was that episode like for you and Bob as team owners?
Well, there was a lot of shenanigans going on from South Florida. So there's no denying that with Gary and all that stuff going on. And I think, unfortunately, we got a little bit of, I think people maybe thought we were messing around with some things we should have been doing as well, which is completely untrue. We just wanted to race. And, those guys were our customers, but we never messed around with stuff. But I think we paid a price for that when we first came up here. And I can remember Bill Jr. calling me and asking me,
wow,
is there anything we need to know about, you guys, I want to know. And we said, no, we're not doing anything we shouldn't be doing, and never have and never will. And Bob's dad was a prominent orthopedic surgeon down there. You don't want to do anything to.
Yeah. So it was a little bit of guilt by association,
well,
maybe.
I think it was. I think just coming from that area.
Yeah, and being from Miami.
Yeah, so I think all that played a role in that. And there's probably people today that think that we had a bunch of money and came up here, which is completely untrue.
Yeah.
We did not. But what we did have was a lot of desire to want to race. And but Gary did a good job. Gary's a racer.
Yeah.
He got tied up in stuff he probably shouldn't have done. But he doesn't hide it. He's been
very open.
Very open with it and all that sort of thing. But he was just a customer of ours. I raced with him. I drove his late model down there some at Highland Speedway. And, he was a part of us growing, and a part of his racing career somewhere, chapter in there with us. But I think we did have to pay a price for coming from South Florida to some degree. I mean, I'd hear rumblings of it, or if you're out looking for a sponsor, you're competing with somebody, and they'd say, well, you got to watch out for those guys. They were from South Florida. There might be some baggage, but there never was. We didn't do it, and I can say that with a clean conscience. We just didn't participate in any of that stuff.
Once you got that in the rearview mirror, you did finally catch some stability with Joe Ruttman when he came on board early in the 1982 season. You actually got a handful of top 5 finishes. And those were your first as a team owner. After everything that you had been through, meeting in the middle, exchanging motors and burning the candle and everything, that must have been almost like winning the Daytona 500 to get at least a little bit of sense of stability and a little bit of a taste of success.
Well, it was. But also, there's people always watching, and it goes back to the Ned Jarrett thing and Joe Ruttman.
Yeah.
we were networking in the thing, and people saw you working hard and your stuff was competitive. And I think a key for Bob and I's success, we did everything ourselves. So the motors, we weren't buying engines from somebody or cars from somebody, or we were just doing everything. And I think people look at that and they see that and say, you know, I want to, maybe that's not something we need to look at. You know, that's kind of cool that they're doing all that stuff. But like you said, I think it attracted the Ned and Ruttman, and it got us started, and we were able to capitalize on that. We didn't win any races, but we were competitive.
Yeah.
And I think it built our confidence up a lot as well, saying, you know, we can really do this. I mean, it started out as, well, I don't know if we can do it or not in the back of your mind, but we're going to try. And then when you run good and you wind up attracting guys that are prominent in the sport at that time, you know, it gives you confidence as well. And back to the Neil Bonnett, Warner Hodgdon, Bobby Allison, you know, maybe you guys ought to look at doing something with Butch and Bob for a year. You know, it was a big gamble for those guys. I mean, they had no idea what to expect. Warner didn't know Bob and I from nothing. You know, he's familiar with the Wood Brothers and Junior Johnson and all that sort of thing. And all of a sudden, he's going to be spending some money with us, and we're going to put Neil Bonnett in our car from the Wood Brothers, of all things, to these two kids. Who are these guys? I don't know. Yeah, might be a little sketchy. But we unloaded at Daytona, won the Clash. We won the 125 qualifying race. Should have won the 500, and we wound up having an oil scavenge issue in the engine. We won the 600 at Charlotte. We won Atlanta. Sat on the pole at Darlington. You know, we won a couple Busch races with Neil that same year. It was outstanding year. So I think it really perked us up. You know, everything that we had wanted to do, all of a sudden we're like, we won a NASCAR race.
Yeah.
You know, a lot of people come and go in this sport and don't get to win. I mean, a lot of people. So, you know, it really was an eye-opener for us and gave us a lot of confidence. Unfortunately, Neil had a one-year deal with us and then went to juniors to be Darrell Waltrip's teammate, you know, in '84. But that success we had that year brought him back later after he had run his time out at juniors.
Did you know going into the deal with Warner and Neil that it was just going to be a one-time?
Oh, absolutely.
One-year deal?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
And that probably would not have happened even with us. I think Warner really wanted to run the Wood Brothers to run '83 the whole season with them. Neil had success with them. They had won some races with the Woods. But I don't think the Wood Brothers wanted to run the full schedule. It's just they had never done it, and I don't think they were geared up to do it. Not that we were. We weren't geared up to do it either. But I just think that opportunity knocked on the door, and the stars lined up for him to come. Yeah, but it's absolutely a one-year deal. Junior had bought into Junior's operation. They wanted to do a two-car Budweiser team. But when it all came together, they didn't have time to, or Junior didn't feel like he had time to get a second team up and running at the time. So they had a one-year stint. But Neil hadn't run all the races either. There's tracks he had never been to. But they wanted him to have a place to go for 1 year that he could go and run everywhere, so to speak. And but it was really, I think it caught us all off guard how successful we were that year with him.
Warner Hodgdon came into the sport in the early to mid 1980s, and he had this huge impact on the sport. But he left almost as quickly as he had come on the scene. Who was the Warner Hodgdon that you knew, and what kind of impact did he have on Rahmoc?
Well, he had a huge impact on us. I think that he had to be convinced that we weren't going to embarrass. He was a big image guy. He reminds me a lot of Roger Penske. You know, Roger Penske is top notch in everything Roger does. The look of the team, the look of the equipment, you know, it's really paramount. And Warner was the same way. And I think had Warner nixed us running together with him, you know, I wouldn't be sitting here today with you, I'm sure. So his impact on us was huge. He had a lot of confidence in us. We met with him. I told you earlier, we wrote our contract out on a legal pad. And we did the deal. And he did everything he said he was going to do with us, and we did everything we said we were going to do. And it worked. But I think there was nobody, I'm not going to say shock's the right word. I think pleasantly surprised at the end of the season. Warner left happy. we were certainly happy at the end of the season with Neil running with us for a year. So it was. We had our bumps and grinds throughout the year, but it was. You look back on it, and it was pretty amazing. Coming from, we had never run all the races before either, but to sit on some poles and win a couple races and won a couple sportsman races and win that in that same time frame was really cool stuff.
You mentioned the fact that you went to Daytona and you won the class, you won your qualifying race. Was that your "we've made it" moment?
I think it was certainly really rewarding to do that. There again, when you start out in NASCAR, you know, NASCAR Cup racing is I think the toughest racing there is in the world, really. And it was no different back then. You know, you had the Richard Pettys, Cale Yarboroughs, Buddy Baker, all those are in there. And I think to go out and take the checker flag in front of those guys is clearly rewarding, no doubt about it. And but I think it really gave our team credibility as well. You know, there again, knowing that we're building the cars and Bob's building the motors, and these guys are serious. You know, this is pretty amazing that they can do that, and put all that together, and for a one-year program was clearly rewarding, no doubt about it. And it's like I said earlier, I think to come into the sport of Cup racing and look at your career, had a lot of lows, but we had a lot of highs, but have some checker flags and say you won some races. We didn't win 30 races, but I think we won a total of 9 NASCAR races, including the Busch stuff that we won. But that's a successful career for me, with humble beginnings. You know, Bob and I started in Rahmoc with nothing. We literally had nothing but desire.
Yeah.
And to take it to where it won some races and people noticed was clearly gratifying and satisfying to do what we did.
1983, you got a second place finish in Atlanta. You got poles at North Wilkesboro and Bristol, and then you go to Charlotte for the 600. What do you remember about that day?
There's a story there. We were sitting on pit road before the race, and a valve cover. Now, we were lined up for the start of the race. A valve cover stud broke. And on a small block Chevrolet, they had a little bit of a long thing you could, and somebody, I want to say Buddy Parrott, or somebody walked by the car when that thing broke, and it fell down and hit the headers and made a ding. Somebody came over to us. I keep wanting to think it was Buddy Parrott or somebody. Said, something fell off your car. Sitting out, they heard it. Got a NASCAR official. They let us open the hood, and a stud had broke off the cylinder head for the valve cover before the start of the race, and they let us fix it. Had that not happened, we probably wouldn't have won that race. We might not have started the race. I don't know, but that was one story I remember from that race in specific. And then we won the race really through a lot of pit strategy at the end. Bob made some really good calls, and I want to say Buddy Baker was driving the Wood Brothers car, and he was running us down at the end of that race, you know, but through some calls we wound up winning the race. So those are two things that kind of stick out, that, you know, that there was some gutsy calls made at the end by Bob, and the Wood Brothers probably would have had another notch in their belt had the race been much longer. But
Yeah.
But it was a good day. I mean, running 600 miles, we were competitive all day and had been competitive the whole season up to that point. So that was our first big Cup win. And the 600's a big one. You know, it's 600 miles in the car, and it was a big deal for us.
When Warner and Neil left at the end of '83, was there a sense that maybe you were going back to square one again, or did you have enough momentum that you felt confident going into 1984?
Well, if you remember, in 1984, when Neil was leaving, Richard Petty was supposed to drive our car.
I did not remember that.
With STP.
So apparently I didn't do enough research.
And it's in his book. So we had a deal there again to Ralph Salvino, STP. Richard was leaving Level Cross. This is when he first was leaving to do his own deal or get away or whatever had happened up there. we were running with Richard. We went to Daytona and tested with Richard and STP on the car. Through all that stuff, politics started to take over. Mike Curb got involved, and it unraveled through politics. And Mike Curb got involved with Richard, and Bob Tezak got involved with Uno. I don't remember that name or not back in the in the day, and it completely unraveled due to politics. And Richard and Mike Curb wound up doing their thing together for the Daytona 500 in '84. We had actually got an injunction against us. We weren't even going to be able to race through the lawsuits. That we were not going to be able to take our car to the racetrack through some legal things that were going on with the politics side.
Yeah.
And that all got released right before Daytona, so we were allowed to race, but we went down there without a deal. So we went from being on top of the world, and even when the season was over, with the intent of, I mean, we worked all winter on the intent of Richard was going to be our driver for the next 3 or 4 years.
Yeah.
And it all completely unraveled.
What happened? I mean,
Politics. So, we were just two kids, and we tried to get ramrodded by bigger things. And we were lucky to hang on to our race team through all that. It was all legal stuff. It had nothing to do with on-track performance. On-track performance got us in high-level politics, and that about did us in. And so we scrambled at the last minute, and we wound up putting Dave Marcus in the car. And for the year, you know, Dave took a little bit of a break from him spending money on his stuff. We had no set sponsorship deal throughout the year. We had Coca-Cola in the car one time. I think Simon Ives was on the car one time, and it was a struggle for us through '84, a real struggle. And everything that we had accomplished in '83, building up good equipment, good motors, and, you know, able to rebuild everything, in '84 we used it all up. You know, we were stretching our resources out as far as we could go in '84. And the end of '84, we made it through the year. And if you remember, Lake Speed drove my car in 1985 in the Daytona 500. And at the end of '84, we had struggled so hard, we had no new deal coming. People wanted to drive, but we needed some resources. We had a taste of money, taste of winning, and you've got to have resources to do that.
Yeah.
So we had a back-to-back year from '83 to '84 where we were on top of the world and we were in the bottom of the valley in '84. And at the end of '84, we almost didn't have anything to sell to a driver or anything else. So Lake Speed called us up because our stuff is fast. We just the year before we run with Neil, run at Daytona, and Lake didn't have anything going on. And Lake says, "Let's run the Daytona 500." We said, "We have no money. We're broke. We're backed in a corner. We have nothing going on. Well, I'll front you a little bit of money if you guys want to go." And we decided to go because Bob and I talked about maybe not even going. It was so demoralizing not having something put together. So we went down there, and the rest is history. We wound up running second in the Daytona 500 and wound up getting that Nationwide deal for a multi-year sponsorship. So that, I mean, we were in that position a couple times throughout our career where we were just completely backed in a corner on things that necessarily weren't our doing, but just the way things evolved. But we were always able to make something happen when we got in those positions to move on to the next year.